So, this was a few years back, when I was in my early 20s. I had two close friends at the time, John and Cam, and we decided we were going to do something kind of dumb but fun. We were going to spend the night in this really old church. I'm talking old, like several hundred years old, creaky wood floors, the works. It's still in use, but at night it's just empty. And the sanctuary, when the lights are off, is basically pitch black. We had permission to be there, so we set up sleeping bags in the basement. Funny enough, the basement was actually kind of cozy. Low ceilings, carpet, a few couches, and folding tables. Definitely more comfortable than the rest of the place. The sanctuary and upper floors felt cold and huge by comparison. Everything was fine until about 3 in the morning. Me and John were still awake, kind of wired, while Cam was in his sleeping bag on the far side of the room. John suggested we go upstairs and check out the sanctuary. It sounded creepy, but I was in the mood for it, so we decided to go. We left the basement and went through the little side hallway that connects to the sanctuary's front doors. We stepped in, and right away, the difference in atmosphere hit me. It was freezing compared to the basement, and the air smelled like old wood and dust. Some faint light leaked in through the cracks around the doors and the small stained glass windows, just enough so we could make out shapes, the outlines of the pews, the center aisle stretching way into the dark. You couldn't see the pulpit at all. It was just this big black void up ahead. We stood there for a minute, letting our eyes adjust. Then John smirks and dares me to walk all the way up to the front. I didn't want to look like a chicken, so I said, "Sure," and started walking. I kept my pace slow, partly because I couldn't see that well, and partly because I had this horrible mental image. Like any second, a hand was going to shoot out from under one of the pews and grab my ankle. My heart was pounding. The sound of my footsteps on the wood seemed way too loud in that silence. I was maybe 3/4 of the way down the aisle when there was this sudden, loud bang from my right. It echoed in the empty room, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned and bolted straight back to the door where John was. That's when we heard laughing coming from above us. Turns out, Cam had snuck up into the balcony while we were in the basement, grabbed a box of tissues, and threw it down to scare me. I was furious, but also relieved. We yelled at him for being an idiot, then all headed back to the basement. We hung out for a bit longer, but maybe 20 minutes later, me and John got the urge to try the sanctuary again. This time, I told him I wasn't going down the aisle alone. We got to the top of the basement stairs, and I motioned for him to wait. I had this feeling Cam might try to follow us and mess with us again. Sure enough, after a few seconds, I see him at the bottom of the stairs tiptoeing up, looking at his feet so he doesn't make a sound. He's about halfway up when he finally looks up and sees us just standing there watching him. He freezes for a split second, realizes we've caught him, and then, because he's still committed to the bit, lets out this blood-curdling scream. Even though I knew it was coming the moment I saw his face, it still made my stomach drop. The sound was so sharp in the quiet. We all laughed a little nervously, and he went back to his sleeping bag. Me and John continued into the sanctuary. We stood at the back again, and I tried to convince him to walk to the front this time, but he flat out refused. Nowhere's something important to know about that church. The pews are really old, solid wood, heavy. When someone sits in one, it makes a deep, long creak. You can't miss it. We were just standing there, whispering, when out of nowhere, all the pews on the left side of the sanctuary creaked at the exact same time. Not one or two, all of them. It sounded exactly like a full congregation had just sat down at once. The sound went down the line in a wave, like weight was actually pressing the seats. I froze. My first thought was that it had to be Cam again, but there's no way. We had just seen him in the basement minutes ago, and there was no way he could have run upstairs without passing us. I didn't even think. We just turned and bolted down the hallway back to the basement. Cam was still lying in his sleeping bag, looking half asleep. We told him what happened, and he swore up and down it wasn't him. And the thing is, I believe him. There's no back staircase, no way in from outside that wouldn't have made noise. And it wasn't random creaks from the wood settling. It was all at once, like a coordinated movement. To this day, I can't explain it. I've been in that church dozens of times since, but I've never heard anything like it again. I was around 10 or 11 when this happened. Back then, I lived in an old one-story house with my grandfather and my older brother. It wasn't a creepy house. It had its quirks, sure. Slightly uneven floors, doors that didn't always close all the way. But to me, it just felt lived in. I never thought about ghosts or hauntings. I was a happy kid, more focused on cartoons, exploring the woods near our place, and finding new ways to annoy my brother than worrying about anything supernatural. I'd heard other people tell scary stories, but they always sounded made up to me. The house was just home. I had this habit of sleeping on the couch in the living room instead of my bed. I liked being out there. The faint orange glow from the street lamp outside leaked through the curtains, painting the walls in soft light. From the kitchen, the fridge hummed in a slow, steady rhythm. The couch smelled faintly of the old fabric cleaner my grandpa used. It all felt safe and familiar. But one night, for some reason, I just couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. I tried pulling the blanket over my head, then kicking it off. Nothing worked. After a while, I decided to give up and do what I usually did when I was restless: go down the hall and bother my brother. His room was at the very end of a long hallway. At night, it felt even longer, like the darkness stretched out farther than it should have. The walls seemed to swallow the faint light from the living room. I walked down to his door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. He was lying on his bed, still awake, fiddling with something in his hands. I sat down at the edge of the bed, and we started talking. Nothing important, just whatever came to mind. Then we both noticed it. Out in the hallway, a light flicked on. Not the harsh brightness of the ceiling light, but a softer, glowing light, like it was spilling out from one of the connecting rooms. At first, we thought it was Grandpa getting up to grab a drink. We leaned over to get a better look. It wasn't him. Something was moving toward us. It wasn't shaped exactly like a person, no clear head or arms, but it was about as tall as a grown man. It was made entirely of light, pure white gold light, and it was pulsing, like it was breathing in slow motion. It didn't flicker like a bad bulb or shift like a flashlight beam. It moved with purpose, steady and slow. My brother reached to his nightstand, grabbed his pocket knife, and flicked it open. He just held it there. We didn't move toward the door, didn't even speak. I felt frozen, not in a paralyzing fear, but in that strange way you feel when something is so unusual you can't quite process it. My heart was pounding, but I was more curious than anything else, like I was watching something that wasn't supposed to exist, and I needed to see what it would do next. It came closer until it reached the very end of the hall, right next to Grandpa's bedroom door. Then in the blink of an eye, it was gone. No fade out, no flicker, just gone, as if someone had flipped a switch. A few seconds later, Grandpa's door creaked open. He stepped out, rubbing his eyes, and asked why we were turning the lights on and off. He said he'd seen the glow from the crack under his door. My brother told him exactly what had just happened. Grandpa didn't look surprised, not even a little. He just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting it. Then he said he'd seen the same thing before, more than once. Sometimes it would appear while he was watching TV, just standing in the hallway, pulsing, and then vanishing again. He said it never made a sound, never caused anything to move or shift. Just light. Years later, when I was older, Grandpa told me the rest. The man who lived in the house before us had been struggling badly with depression. One night alone in that same hallway, he'd taken a shotgun and ended his life. I've always been a skeptic. I don't buy into every ghost story I hear, but what I saw that night, I can't explain away. I was awake. My brother was awake. We saw the same thing. And the strange part is, it didn't leave me afraid. At this age, I was already thinking about what happens after we die, and the thought of nothing forever made my stomach turn. Seeing that light made me believe, even just a little, that there's something after we're gone. I haven't seen it since. But once was enough. When I was 11, my family moved across the country into this massive, creaky old house. My parents said it was full of character, which was their way of justifying the fact that it was over 100 years old, built in the 1890s, according to the realtor. The floors dipped in places, the doors didn't quite shut right, and the upstairs always smelled faintly like dust and something metallic. The very first night there, none of my stuff was unpacked yet. The TV wasn't even hooked up, so I dragged out my keyboard from its box to kill some time before bed. I set it up in my room, right near the middle where the floor felt the most solid, and started pecking out this awful song I'd learned in music class. About halfway through, I got this weird chill. Not just goosebumps, but that deep, sinking cold that crawls up the back of your neck. I glanced up, and across the room was a big old window. It was dark outside, so the glass was basically a mirror. I could see my reflection, hunched over the keyboard, and right behind me, clear as day, was an old woman. She was standing just over my shoulder, her head slightly tilted, hands clasped in front of her, like she was waiting for something. She wasn't moving. I didn't look twice. I bolted down the stairs, screaming for my mom. She brushed it off, said I was just overtired or spooked because of the move. I wanted to believe her, but I knew what I saw. Over the 7 years we lived in that house, I saw her 3 more times. The first was about a year later. I was heading downstairs at night for a glass of water, and halfway down the staircase, I froze. She was there, coming down toward me, one step at a time. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me the entire time. I backed up until I was at the top again, and when I blinked, she was gone. The other 2 times were in the spare bedroom, catty corner from mine. That room always felt colder than the rest of the upstairs. Once, I was looking for wrapping paper in the closet and saw her face peeking out from between a rack of hanging clothes in the far corner. The second time, she was standing in the exact same spot, just slightly leaning out from behind the coats, like she was watching. And then there was the nightly stuff. I'd be lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I'd hear the creak of the threshold. Always the same sound, like someone had just stepped into the room. Then soft, deliberate footsteps would circle my bed. They'd go past my desk, into the tiny dressing room attached to my bedroom, linger there for a few seconds, and then walk back out the same way. Sometimes I'd convince myself it was the house settling, but a few nights I woke up to something else entirely. This icy, faint breath against my face, like someone was leaning down just inches away. Years later, I found out from a neighbor that a woman had died in the house in the 1960s. Not violently, apparently from some long illness, but the room she spent most of her time in, the same room I slept in for years. I don't really believe in ghosts anymore. At least that's what I tell myself. But no matter how I try to explain it, I can still picture her face in that window, and I can still feel that cold breath on my cheek like it just happened last night.